Hi, everyone. Welcome today to the Craft Talk and Conversation. I am here today with my good friend Jessie Turner, and we're going to dive into the body and creativity and how to work with the body to resource ourselves as creative people. And so, welcome, Jessie.
Thank you,
And
Stacy.
I wonder if you can tell people who you are, like what you do, and we'll just go from there.
Sounds good. So I'm a relational somatic therapist, and I do basically a kind of counseling that integrates neurobiology, neurology, and the nervous system, trauma informed, and all through the body. And it's a more of well, it's just a bit of a different approach to therapy where we're integrating presence and even you could say mindfulness into what's happening right here, right now in the body through sensations. And this broadens our understanding of our own experience. And so, one of the things that I do with that and with my work with you, Tracy, has been to integrate that approach to therapy into creative spaces. So getting really curious about the body as a resource for expanding our understanding of our own experience and of the experience that's happening around us. And so that's what I get up to. That's what I love.
Yeah, and in terms of, our connection, we had been talking about just to fill folks in, like I work a lot with encouraging writers to write from the body, to include bodies in their stories and connect with the emotional experience that is in the body for their readers. Excuse me, uh why is my oh my adapter not working? Anyway, because I come from a yoga background and I am a very kinesthetic person, but I was noticing when I was working with writers the challenge of translating for some people, getting them to connect with their bodies. And so, in conversation with you, Jesse, I thought, oh my God, this is the perfect modality to integrate into the work that I do. So it's been so exciting to share that space with you.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it's an interesting journey because at first it can seem kind of those things can seem disconnected. Like, what does the body have to do with writing? And what's been really fascinating for Tracy and I as we unwrap these conversations more and more is that there is such a vast interior landscape that is here that we are often disconnected to because mostly our training in this society has been to kind of live from here up, and
Mhm.
we value knowledge and information. And so it's like almost dropping tendrils down into this whole experience that's actually happening here already and creating a new conversation for ourselves. And that gives all this richness to the creative process because we're
Yes.
expanding our own conversation that's happening here. And then that is just such a gift for whatever project we're working on.
Yeah, and I think we were talking about this yesterday in the group, but that the body, when we think we know what we want to say, it's sort of stuck here. And when we resource and we come into, what's really going on, even for a character, even in fiction, it's like what's really going on and feeling into, how that character, because we, as writers, we're transmissioning it. Is that right? No.
Transmitting?
Something like that. Transmitting it. It's moving through us. It's being transmitted through us, through our bodies. And so the story, the voice of the story is actually, I believe, in the body because it's more original than I think what like all our conditioning, all our we were talking about synaptical firings, we kind of go down the same roads, which can be kind of cliche and not even our own, right?
Mm-hmm.
But when we connect with the body and when we resource from the body, we can come into something that's fresh and new and alive. I think that's the word we like to use.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we do. Yeah, and I think aliveness begets curiosity, curiosity begets aliveness, and when there's curiosity and when we are in connection with the body, something like if you're writing about a character who's angry, that's not a very interesting way to express a character's experience. But if we can understand our own body's experience of anger as an individual, and we get to that place of like so specifically individual that then somehow touches on that universal experience, when we can so deeply relate to like, oh yeah, that time when I felt like my feet were going to lift off the ground and my head was on fire and my heart was beating so fast, or whatever it is, that there's this whole experience happening in the body that as we get more curious with it, like you said, it gets more interesting because it's not so much just the same story we've already heard.
One of the things I think with the somatic counseling that you do and that can translate, which is fascinating to me, being a writer and someone who loves to work with images, is that work of going into the body, even what you described, my feet lifting off the ground or whatever, but like that the body can be also a source of fresh images for us. Do you want to speak to that a little?
Yeah, that is such a fascinating experience that I have with myself and with clients, that when we invite ourselves into true presence with the body, images often arise for people. And this can be connected to what we call implicit memory. Implicit memory is essentially the memories that we can't really recall, and it's the meaning we make of things as we experience things and life goes on. And what we're coming to understand um, through neurobiology is that really those implicit memories are stored in our body.
Mm.
So as we take time and slow down and get out of the frenetic pace of thoughts and activity and get quiet and connected to the body, images can arise. They can be memories or dreams or just an image of something that is, it feels like there's a knot of wool in my stomach or something, that this image will just be here, which again, for the creative process, like what richness that is.
Yes.
And like you were saying, it's like, it's also unexpected. It's not the predictable thing that the mind will come up with, that like, we're not necessarily going to come up with that if we're trying, or it might be kind of dry in a way. But when we are really connected and it emerges from the body, I like to say bubbling up. It's like when we get really quiet and we listen rather than seek, right? Rather than try to find, if we sit back into like a listening state, these images can just surface and come from our body up to our mind. And this gives just this rich landscape of possibility, of places to explore or images to use in our practices. So
Yes, yes, yes. And I think that is one of the things that, in terms of story, whether it's even if it, if we're writing memoir in theory, we know where the story is going because we've lived it. but the exploration is still to kind of attend to memory, attend to what else is there, and we can do that through the body and through those images. Whereas in fiction, you kind of don't necessarily know where it's going to go. So again, the body can be a guide to take us to the next, oh, there's all of a sudden there's this boat that keeps showing up in my body, or this image of a tree. And so what is that? What is that? And maybe I need to take my characters there somehow. So it's kind of exciting. It's a different way of moving than than kind of assuming we know. I think that's the thing too, as writers, when we get out of, and humans, but when we get out of assuming that we know what something means or where something goes, and get into that curious space that you're talking to, then things can open up and become, yeah, deeper and more resonant, I think. Yeah.
The image that came to you while you were speaking, that was kind of like, I feel like this work puts me at the feet, like sitting at the feet of mystery. And that is just so much more interesting than already knowing.
Yes.
I don't know if you had a place where you're going to go next with the conversation, but I was just thinking about one of the things that we talk about is like, why is this important right now? And if you want to talk about that, or if you had another.
Yeah, I know you can go right into that.
Yeah,
why is this important right now? Oh, you mean like in the scope of humanity, in
the scope of humanity. Yeah, because I mean, we can sit here and talk about the body and writing and our own process, and yes, these are important things for our own practices. And in this moment in humanity, giving ourselves permission to be with the body that we have and the body that we are, and let this unique body be taking space. And there's just something very interesting to me about bodies taking space right now, as opposed to thoughts and ideas and consumption, the space of consumption. That just being with these bodies and the body of the earth, being with our own bodies, I think is a practice that reminds us that we can also just be with the body of the earth. And this perpetual motion of thought and consumption is always moving. And to be with the body, we actually have to be with some stillness, and get curious about the story that's here, the story that wants to emerge. And you want to take it from there around story, and why new story is important right now.
Well, I think that that's part of, it's like the body is taking up space, and it's the stories too, the story, what's the story of the body, of your body. And it doesn't mean, which can be such a, that can be such a unpacked term or sentiment, but it really is like getting out of the cookie cutter shape of what we think, who we think we should be, and how we think we should tell our story, as though there's only, a handful of acceptable right bodies in this world, as though there are only an acceptable handful of right ways to tell a story. And the invitation that, I think we're creating, and more than just us are creating, is like, what about your true story? Like, what's the story that's here in your heart, in your body? And giving yourself permission, which is kind of that stillness, right? To to let your story emerge as it wants to be emerged versus kind of trying to squeeze it into some idea of how it should be, which doesn't mean you can't use form to help you shape that story, but that it doesn't have to be one of the three forms, that the formula doesn't have to be a formula.
I love that form doesn't necessarily equal formula.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that we can get caught in just, and I've said it before on here and I'll say it again, but like with all our exposure to Hollywood films and blockbuster this and bestseller that, is that it can feel like there's only four ways to tell a story.
Yeah.
And that's just not true.
It's not true. And as a therapist, I feel like part of my work is to invite people into their own story, that they're not wrong for living a story that is different than the very narrow amount of stories that we're presented with in the media and in this culture of the right way to do things. And boy, do we need some new stories to emerge, and we need our creativity we need the space for our creativity to allow that. So
can you speak to how this work, because you're just, you're talking about working with clients in the very narrow stories, and when some of the challenges that writers run into are perfectionism, inner critic, does my story matter, all of these things, or procrastination, how this work can also help us around blocks to our creativity.
Yeah. So part of what we do in this work is go through what is here. So often we feel like the block is the thing that's preventing us from the thing that we want to do. And one of the practices that I have walked through with writers is to pause and be with what is the sensation of the block? What is it that actually keeps interrupting what we think is our flow to get our attention? Is there something here? Is there actually another story that we may be not wanting to tell that's wanting to get our attention? There may be a belief underneath that energy that keeps showing up. And if we can get quiet and tend to these places in us and give them the attention that they need, perhaps they will relax and settle enough to free the flow up again. Or maybe the flow is in there. Maybe the flow is actually in what we perceive to be the block. As well as that sometimes there is a block or a story or an imprint that is telling us a self-defeating story about worth, or whatever that may be, and they are often this narrow story. It's like, well, I don't have this, or I didn't experience this or this, whether that's like some big success or some big tragedy. It's like, oh, well, if I don't have this big tragedy, then my story's not that interesting. Or if I don't have this big success, then my story's not that interesting. So part of the work is like really allowing ourselves to belong in our fullness. What does that look like?
What does that look like? What does that mean?
Feel like?
Yeah.
I mean, even saying it right now, I have sensation in my body, in my hands, that's like, wow, what does it mean to actually just say, everything that's in me can just be here right now?
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean that there aren't struggles that we have that need tending to and healing in different ways. But when we come at those things with opposition, internal opposition, of trying to force things out, it's often not that effective. So when we can start allowing what's this body and what's in this body to be here. Yeah, what is that story that's outside of this little scope that says, you know, marriage, 2 kids, and retirement, and da 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 da. You know, it's there are however many billion people there are that many stories. There are that many bodies.
Yeah, plus more bodies.
Plus all the non-human bodies.
Yeah.
All the stories of those bodies.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
And so, well, I'm kind of curious, and then we can talk about how, you know, what we've got coming up. But if we did like a little, let's say I'm running into procrastination. I just like can't sit down to write. I'm making excuses. I've got this, and this. I'm really busy. I'm really busy. That's the story. Because that's not, you know, that's probably a lot of people are having that experience. I'm really busy. I've got to work. I've got to, you know, make car payments, mortgage payments, buy groceries, attend to my whatever. So I can't do it because I don't have time. And then I feel bad because I don't have time. I feel like I'm a failure because I don't have time. I know I should make time, but you know, I'm not. So how do I work with that?
Good question. Like a session. No, just kidding. Well, I think what I would do is, well, it's a little bit ironic because what I would invite is to make a little time to actually just sit down with this. And so it's the thing that, like I was saying, it's the thing that we try to push away so that I can finally get to the writing or the practice, whatever it is I would sit and notice that busyness or that energy of busyness and having all these things to do has a feeling in your body. So I would invite someone to actually just stop and notice what's the feeling, what's the sensation of this, and how familiar is this sensation. Just start to notice that there is something playing out here, that we often think these things are coming at us from the outside. And true, like we do live in a culture with systemic problems around busyness. And can we just pause and notice what's happening in the body? What is the energy? What's the sensation of this? So if it's like this, I might just sit and be like, wow, okay, this is the energy that I'm noticing. It feels like this inside my chest or something. And then would just pause with that and check it out. Get curious. Is there a story underneath this? Is there a story that says, if I'm not always busy, then I must not be important? Interesting. Getting curious. And there is a little bit of a trick here, because like you said, then we feel bad and we feel guilty, and all this is curiosity and judgment can't necessarily happen at the same time. So when we apply curiosity, we're sort of shining so much light that judgment doesn't have enough room. And it just creates an environment of more possibility. So getting curious, okay, what is that story? That if I don't stay busy, so what if I wrote about that? What would happen? And just get curious. What would happen if I stopped being busy? What do I think would happen?
Right.
And then another little step to practice with that is, what's the need that's here?
Yeah.
So if there's a story of like that I'm not important, there's a need to feel valuable and important. How can I give myself that in little ways? And So those are some layers and practices that you could play with.
Beautiful. Yeah. So inviting all of you who are watching to give that a try next time you run into, maybe in the next 2 hours, it might happen, to try some of that workout. And so, Jessie, we are collaborating on it's an live, in-person experience that happens October 30th. And though many people who are watching may not be in the area, let's talk about what this is, because we may do an online version in the future.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, so we've got a day planned where Tracy and I will be sort of taking turns guiding people through somatic exercises. So a little bit like what I just did, where I was like, okay, oh, this has an energy, and now what's the story underneath the energy? So these things are much easier to do with guidance.
Yes,
So,
absolutely.
um,
Absolutely.
where is this really taking the space to give time to what we know is important, to what you and I are giving time to this because we know it's important for us,
Mm-hmm.
to tend to what's happening here in this moment in the body, and give it some invitations, whether that's stillness or movement, and see from like what we're talking about, this curious mind, or putting the mind in a place of curiosity, what can bubble up from the body.
Yes, yes. And part of the call, or part of the reason that we've created this, is to, well, first of all, we're really excited that it's a live, in-person um, workshop, but also recognizing the tremendous stress that so many people have been undergoing for the past, well, long time, but particularly since the beginning of the pandemic. And what that does to creativity. And actually, what we really need in this world right now is our creative resource. And so bringing it to a place where it's not just a place of productivity, but a place of nourishment, and a place of, as you say, I want to say, wild exploration and curiosity, because that is what the world needs right now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And we've used the word reclaiming the creative body because we know that the creative body is always here, but it's like there's a pile of things on top of it. It's
Yeah.
sometimes with all that stress and busyness and what's happening in the world, and the amount of information we are consuming, it's almost like where the creativity can become the pea at the bottom of the mattress, the little bit that hasn't had any space to grow, or the little seed that's just in the dark waiting for some nourishment, for some water and some light and some space. So we believe that it's always here, and that it's important that we make space for it. So that's why we're calling it reclaiming, because we know it's already ours.
That's right. And this is a place to nourish it and rewild yourself in that creative space. So thanks so much for hopping on here today, Jessie. And I'll put the information down below where you can, if you happen to be on Vancouver Island or close by and want to join us Sunday, October 30th, not 31st, 30th. We would love to see you there.
We would. And I'll see
Yes.
you there.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks,
Thanks,
everyone.
Tracy.
Thanks,
Thanks, everyone.
Jessie.